My name is Lily Belisle. I've studied the legal system through a sociological lens and also a gender sexuality studies lens. And the title of my TED Talk is There's No Perfect Victim.
Fantastic. So kind of just to start off, I'm very curious, how'd you decide to center around this particular topic? Yeah, and yeah. And if you want to give
Yeah,
a
yeah,
very brief recap as to what you'll be talking about. Of course, not
yeah.
giving away too much, but
Yeah, absolutely. So, for my, so I've, over the last year and a half, I've conducted research on the treatment of survivors of sexual violence and the treatment of their cases or their criminal cases kind of in the legal system. So the treatment of cases related to sexual violence as compared to other criminal assault cases not related to sexual violence. So looking at the rhetoric, the attitudes, kind of the types of questions asked on cross-examination, excuse me, the attitudes of lawyers and attorneys and judges. So that's kind of broadly what I'm looking at and what my talk will center around. How I chose to center around this specific topic, I would say, so last spring, during the spring of 2023, I worked as an intern at the Women's Bar Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization in Massachusetts or in Boston that provides free legal services to survivors of domestic violence and intimate partner violence. And in that setting, both as I witnessed and as the different staff and attorneys kind of expressed to me, I just witnessed over and over how the legal system is failing to serve and protect, different populations differentially, and the ways this falls particularly on, groups of people who are marginalized. And I was just seeing kind of the ways that different types of cases were treated differently by the legal system. So, people that would talk to me about how judges just consistently were really unfair and really biased in family law cases or in restraining order cases, or always seem to demonstrate a bias kind of toward the father in kind of a custody case. So I saw that over and over, and so I really was curious to kind of explore more of this prejudicial treatment. I've also kind of just generally had an interest in different ways that the legal system is inaccessible and the different ways that it's kind of set up to be navigated differently by people who do not have resources and are not legally trained. So I've always kind of had an interest in that and kind of the implications of that. But that's kind of what specifically drew me towards this specific niche or area.
that makes sense. And the bias that you're talking about is a very interesting point that you made, because I already read the draft of your speech regarding like
Mhm.
the questions that they asked these jurors before they join the cases,
Mhm.
like regarding what kind of experiences they have, like regarding sexual assault cases, for
Right.
example. And like you would think by like you would, or I guess like it's clear that they think that this is how to remove this
Mhm.
issue of bias, when it's interesting that it's doing the exact
Right.
opposite. So it's,
Right.
it's it's very interesting.
Mhm.
Next, I'm very curious to hear if you feel like what new aspect of this sort of victim blaming problem that you will talk about in your talk do you think that you're addressing in your TED Talk?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I think first and foremost, the data that I collected, my observations, all of what I saw, none of that specifically is new. There's overwhelming amounts of research on this. This shows up in so many different areas. We all are very familiar with this same type of victim blaming, the acceptance of different rape myths and just all these different ways that we operate and treat survivors of sexual assault kind of within this rape culture that we exist in. And so I think kind of first, all of what I saw, none of that is distinct in any way, that is just continuing. But what I'm trying to show and, what I demonstrate is that this is still happening. I think a lot of, at least what I found was that a lot of attorneys that I spoke with, expressed that they feel that this doesn't happen anymore, that, post Me
Mhm.
Too or post, Believe Her, that whole movement, now we've actually swung to the opposite direction. And, now judges and juries are biased against defendants and against people who are accused. And so people think that we've swung kind of to the opposite extreme, and that there's this prejudicial treatment does not exist anymore. And so what I show is that, yes, actually, this is still happening, despite all of the different ways we've progressed. And I specifically talk about despite, even specifically within Massachusetts, despite the state's, increased political progressiveness over the last, 30 years,
Mhm.
the implementation of rape shield laws and the Violence Against Women Act, and, all these different protections that have been put into place to specifically prevent this treatment from happening. Despite all of this, it's still continuing and it's still persisting. And so despite all of this, for some reason, this type of rhetoric and this type of attitudes are still effective and still persuasive and still continue to kind of exist dominantly, in the different types of people who are the arbiters of, what's happening in the legal system.
Mhm. That makes a lot of sense. So it's less about, hey, like, here's what's new, here's what you've never heard about
Mhm.
before, and more about, no, here's what's still ongoing that
Right.
maybe has fallen to the background of your
Mhm.
mind, but surely not for a lot of other people, for sure. I'd
Right.
say,
Yeah. Oh,
I
sorry.
would love to ask you, what advice do you have for people who are trying to basically do what you do and engage in this type of rhetoric regarding sexual assault, but aren't really sure how to go about it, or they don't want to offend anybody or things like that?
Yeah, I guess first I would say that definitely there are so many people doing this work. I feel like I've explored this a lot through the research, but this is a conversation that's happening, and there's so many people who are, community organizing and working with community members. So this is definitely happening, and it's, of course, not just me, but yeah, I
Mhm.
guess I would say on an individual level, I think a lot of what I talk about, or what I will speak about in my talk, is how a lot of the ways that these attitudes and this kind of mindset is being perpetuated is through um more micro level interactions. So this is happening through casual conversations. This is perpetuated by when we as a society kind of brush off casual catcalling, or victim blaming, or unwanted touch on public transportation. It starts kind of at that root.
Mhm.
If we're trying to prevent sexual violence and we're trying to address this from its root, we don't start once it's happening. We start looking at why this is happening, where this begins. So I think that kind of that's something anyone can do. Believe survivors when they share their stories, when they disclose to you, that they were assaulted. Supporting peers in, filing Title IX complaints, or, all the different ways. So I think that kind of that's something anyone can do. I think just carrying this awareness and this willingness to hold people accountable kind of just in daily conversations and in daily life. But I think also I would say BU specifically has a lot of really great student organizations. There's It's On Us, Students for Reproductive Freedom. There's also SARP with, at BU. So there's a lot of different organizations, and I think they're already pioneering a lot of great work. And so I would say kind of just, getting involved with that, making sure to um carry these values kind of just in daily life, and just
Mhm.
really, like, first and foremost, I would say center and uplift the voices of survivors themselves, kind of in hearing like what do people need, what are survivors asking for, kind of
Mhm.
specifically in all this.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that makes things a lot more like manageable for people, instead of, like you said, trying to kind of attack is from a larger point of view.
Right,
So
right, totally.
you already kind of mentioned how you're going to be talking a lot in this talk about the injustices of the law and the justice system as a whole. I'm curious if you would elaborate a little bit on how does the law really get in the way of justice issues such as this one?
Yeah, definitely. I think something that I've thought a lot about in doing this research and in my talk specifically is, what is justice and who is the justice for? Because I think, in some ways the legal system's doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's designed to, convict and incarcerate people. And so if that's the goal, then it's succeeding in that, definitely disproportionately certain people, different disproportionately certain groups are being incarcerated, and certain victims or survivors are being believed more than others. So I think that that's kind of one thing. Looking at that, I would say in terms of failing to believe survivors, I would say a lot, as you mentioned, kind of the jury selection, there's the way that the vetting of jurors happens is really skewed um towards a certain mold of kind of who they're vetting out and who they're allowing onto the jury. So
Mhm.
that's definitely something. They're creating this very skewed pool of people that are not representative of the general population, and people who experience and witness sexual violence kind of at large. So that's something. There's a lot of kind of micro level mechanisms that are happening, like in cases related to sexual assault. Much more often, uh, prosecutors are not permitted to use the language of victim and are required to refer to the survivor or the victim as an alleged victim, which,
Mhm.
in my observations, I did not see happen in other types of cases. So this was very specific, and it's just kind of the subtle language changes that are, required of these types of cases. So I would say those, but I think that definitely just generally kind of what I look at is how the legal system at large is not built to serve justice. It's, of course, um, it should still be treating cases, fairly, but at the same time, um, incarcerating people and sending them to jail, in my opinion, is not accomplishing anything. I think
Mhm.
that what's more effective and more important to target efforts is kind of in the prevention and looking at, how can we reframe our like culturally kind of the behaviors that we accept and tolerate and the different ways we hold people accountable in our lives and in our different institutions. And so I think looking at different alternatives to the legal system altogether is something I argue for. But I think also kind of both are true. One, the legal system as it's operating is not treating these cases fairly, but at the same time, thinking about, well, what is the goal of justice, and what specific justice are we looking for at the end?
This could lead to a whole bigger conversation about restorative and transformative justice.
Mhm.
I don't think we have all the time for that. I'm still thinking about when you said, who is this justice for? And I feel like
Mhm.
if people started asking those questions, they would really see how many people fall through the cracks. But we can't give them too much because they have to come see your talk. So lastly, I'm curious what you genuinely hope people are left with after hearing your TED Talk in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, definitely. No, but all of what you were saying are definitely things I'll be touching on. But yeah, I guess I would say there are two things that I would hope people come away with from my talk. One, as I kind of spoke about before, that there are that the small ways we dismiss sexual violence matter, and the small ways we talk about this and treat people in our lives and refer to, the different behaviors and attitudes matters. So, just that each individual person has the ability and the agency and the autonomy to kind of address this and carry this with them in their daily life. Anyone can do that. So I think that's one. And
Mhm.
then two, the other point that I hope people come away with is that there are alternatives to the legal system that can create justice. Kind of a lot of what I talk about, is very negative, looking at all the ways that the legal system is broken and not designed to serve, people and the different issues that people come to the legal system with.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that we have no other solutions. That doesn't mean that there's no hope. That doesn't mean that there's not ways that we can remedy this and,
It's
provide
about
closure.
looking at what's next, like.
Exactly. So I just really try, or I hope that people will recognize that there are other alternatives, and this isn't kind of unsalvageable, or this isn't inevitable. This doesn't have to be the way that it is. There are things we can do.
For sure. I think the Howard Thurman Center is constantly trying to teach people not to shy away from the hard topics because they are already being talked about, really. So you might as well add and benefit from the conversations. But thank you so much, Lily. Remind the people what the name of your talk is and where they can come and see it and when.
Yes. So the name of my TED Talk is There Is No Perfect Victim. You can see it at the Howard Thurman Center on April 20th. So if you're interested in hearing more, you can come and see me talk about it.
Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.